Hey everyone, welcome to the Wednesday preview playoff show here with Jim Coventry. Been doing it all year long, whether it be the regular season now and with just 3 games left in the season, talking about the 2 championship games, NFC, AFC, and the Super Bowl in 2 weeks. There will be no Pro Bowl show, nothing like that, thank God, because the Pro Bowl does not matter except for career accolades. Funny how that ends up working out in the NFL. But I am at one point, Jim, surprised at the results that we have, the final 4 teams here, and then realistically, not that crazy in my mind. The Chiefs are going to be, it feels like, on 65 straight years of making it to at least the AFC Championship game. The Bills are once again going to be trying to dethrone the king. We'll see if that happens this go around. The Eagles were in one of the best spots in the NFC to make it to this point, given what was their projected schedule. And arguably it got harder with the Rams here in the divisional round as opposed to who they could have faced, but still were able to overcome Matthew Stafford. And frankly, the weather helped things too. And it's the Commanders who were surprised. But if anyone listened to Jim Coventry at all in the playoffs, the expectation the Lions could lose in round 1 was already set up for you. So this is a very intriguing set, of course, divisional rivals with the Eagles and Commanders, and a historic matchup that will likely have implications 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the road when we're discussing the legacy of Josh Allen in particular too. So let's start first with this Eagles-Commanders game. And I want to give you a bit of the runway because you had been on Lions could lose in round 1, or at least their first matchup, for a while. So let's talk about it. What did you see from the Lions' perspective, and what were you concerned about? You thought it'd be the Vikings, and I did as well too, but there was some limitations within the Lions game, and did that manifest here against the Commanders?
It was a catastrophic number of defensive injuries. I believe I heard 18 defensive players were on injured reserve, and they got hit everywhere. In the beginning, it was just the front 7, and then we saw like Jamel Dean go down at corner. And in the NFL playoffs, it is so game plan specific. You would think the regular season, it's not. If you have a weakness in the NFL playoffs and a team is facing you for the season on the line, they are going to attack that weakness. And you have to have an out. And look, Jared Goff's been great in Detroit, but I always say he's a limited quarterback. And if you put him in a scenario where he has to go win you the game, I'm worried about that. I'm still worried about that. He's best if everything around him is perfect, and it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, and you could argue that he did the best he could to win the game, but there was the pick 6, there was the fumble on either that first or second possession as well. The play calling was suspect at times. I want to get your opinion on the did Ben Johnson check out thing, because I had spoke to a few Lions fans in my life, and very interesting side of that. But in my mind, it wasn't even so much the turnovers, which there are plenty. Obviously, if the Lions only have 2, maybe the outcome is different. The Lions defense was not going to be able to stop the Commanders. That felt effectively true really since week 16 or week 17, that Bills game, whatever that ended up being, where there was so many points scored on that side. It was the defensive miscues as well. You think about it, the Commanders' offense isn't that difficult. You know exactly what they want to do. It's a matter of how difficult it is to stop. And when you make logical or knowledgeable mistakes, and I think of that 65-yard touchdown, Terry McLaurin, where it was a bubble to the left, it was a read bubble. If there's a third defender over there, that's not a 65-yard touchdown, but because either due to injuries, attrition, whatever else, miscommunication, a play that is at best, a 5 or 6 yard play in that offense goes for a touchdown. And that gets added on to Jameson Williams throwing an interception. That gets added on to Jared Goff throwing a pick that, it was a bad throw. It was over his head. That's a little bit of luck and circumstance that results in 6 points, 7 points. And when you add all that up, that's what the Lions end up losing in this one. So I'll ask you this question again. Ben Johnson announced as the Bears head coach 2 days ago, immediately after Dennis Allen, former Saints head coach, now defense coordinator for the Bears, is announced. And it's Ben Johnson's lining up an all-star cast of coordinators. And you hear the groans and moans from Lions fans out there being like, well, we lost because Ben Johnson clearly wasn't dialed in. He was already getting his staff ready, and that's why we lost. I don't think that's fair. What should the Lions have done differently? Like, if you are a Lions fan, Jim, complaining about this, what would have been the answer? Like, what would you have asked Ben Johnson to do more effectively?
Well, the one thing I would have asked is, when the game was still in question, and I know you love trick plays, and I know that's probably a Dan Campbell thing more than a Ben Johnson thing, how do you trust Jamison Williams to throw a pass when you're down 10 points in the second half where you can't afford a mistake. Jared Goff could have made a mistake, but he's the quarterback. And Tom Brady, actually, I very rarely pay attention what the TV copy says, but Tom Brady had a great line. He's like, wide receivers, they're not up, they don't have the ability to read the defense like the quarterback does. The quarterbacks do this all day long. Where's the safety? Where's the second corner at? Where's the leverage point? There are all these things a quarterback takes into account. When you throw the ball 3 times a season, maybe, well, no, that's not part of your skill set. That's not a Jamison Williams knock. You're a wide receiver. Unless it's schemed up and the dude's wide open, you're not reading that. And so, but I think that was as much Dan Campbell as it was on the offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson. I think Johnson did a great job. Look, this team was moving the ball up and down the field. They had no issue. Jared Goff is the one who hurt them. It's not Ben Johnson's fault that Jared Goff turned into what I've always said is Jared Goff. Circumstances have to be perfect. When they're not, he is a very limited quarterback. And I know people get hot at me for saying that, but look, he could not have had a better situation in Detroit for these few years. Ben Johnson, in my mind, look, Jared Goff got run out of Los Angeles by Sean McVay, one of the greatest offensive designers of our lifetime, and ran him out of town, could not win with him. And Ben Johnson got as much as possible out of him. So look, I hang it on Goff, not a knock on him. It's just who he is. He's a limited player. He's not a superstar quarterback that is going to take your team and carry them to the Super Bowl. So Ben Johnson's off the hook.
I would agree. The Jamison Williams one, you could put that on Ben Johnson. You could put that on Dan Campbell. Maybe you don't call that play anyway. I've heard a few people be like, well, if you have St. Brown run that play, maybe he's got a better acumen at the throw of the ball. Whatever. I think the designed play for Williams to be the one that throws it is because there's some sort of wrinkle in the defense or a look that they showed earlier that they're trying to capitalize on. My thing is, if you are Ben Johnson, Dan Campbell, the owner of the Lions, random Joe Schmo out there right now, if you know that trick play is going to be called or planned to, I'm sitting there for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of real game time, talking to Jamison Williams saying, if the look isn't there, throw the ball away. So I don't blame that on Ben Johnson. I blame that on Jamison Williams, or if anything, you're blaming Ben Johnson for not talking it through. There are other outcomes besides throw the ball. It could be throw away. It could be take a sack. Yes. It does not need to be an interception. So I don't really put that on Ben Johnson. I put that more on Jamison Williams. Go ahead.
I will add one thing. When people said St. Brown might have thrown it, I think the whole point of the play is Jamison Williams' speed causes defenses to react differently. If you give him the ball, you're in panic mode because and he already break a 61-yard touchdown run in that game earlier? I want to say that happened. His speed is game changing. So I think the thought would have been, once you get him on move, the defense is going to make a beeline for him and somebody's going to be open over the top. But the Commanders' defense, remember, they're coached by Dan Quinn. Very good at disciplining his players. And I think that's where maybe the disconnect was, because I think in that play, if you're going to have it, it would be Williams, because St. Brown, nobody's worried about his speed, right? So you're going to play it honest because anybody can tackle him for the most part. I mean, again, he's good after the catch, but he's not Jamison Williams. So I just want to add that.
There is something to say. There is something to like about if you run a trick play 3 times a game, it naturally becomes, and I'm not even knocking this. If you run a trick play 3 times a game, it naturally becomes less of a trick play, right? Like as opposed to NFL teams running it 3 times a year and you're running it 3 times a game, you as a defense, you as a team that's preparing for this, especially at this point of the season, are going to just naturally be more aware that this outcome could happen, this responsibility that I need to do. You're putting that in the minds of the defense more and more. So that's maybe the one criticism I would have for Ben Johnson. All right, enough of the obituary on Detroit. I understand it's a bit of a surprise. It's let my Packers off the hook. Now the Packers are not the only number 1 seed to lose after 15 games in the first round. Thank you, NFC North brethren in the Lions. Let's talk about this Lions and Eagles game that we're going to have. I'm sorry, we're not going to the Lions. Let's talk about the Commanders and Eagles game that we're going to have here. It was entirely possible that had the Rams beat the Eagles in Philadelphia, the Rams were somehow going to be end up hosting the NFC Championship game. The Snow and Saquon Barkley said otherwise, but for a second consecutive week, Jalen Hurts did not look like the top 7, top 6 quarterback that you typically need your quarterback to be to win a Super Bowl. So now I'm going to ask you this as the first part of this for the Eagles. Is there something wrong with Jalen Hurts? I had kind of shook my head away and ignored the Packers game. I think it was Dan Orlovsky on Twitter a couple weeks ago had basically looked at the All-22 film and said, find me a receiver that's open. I don't know who's open that Jalen Hurts is supposed to hit. And maybe that footage will then show again here for the Rams. Maybe it's conditions. But at some point, Jalen Hurts needs to make the moonball throws that we think he's accustomed to A.J. Brown. There needs to be a point where Jalen Hurts is extending plays, much like we saw Jaden Daniels do against the Lions, and none of that is happening. So what is it with Jalen Hurts?
Well, there's two things. First thing is he's not the passer he was during the year they went to the Super Bowl. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the Eagles had a cheat code. The illegal man downfield penalty was not enforced like it is now. So they commonly had offensive linemen on RPOs 3-4 yards down the field. And on the RPO, like we saw a play called back in that game. It was a long catch. It might have been Goddard. That was exactly the play that they were getting away with the year they went to the Super Bowl. So when you had the combination of Jalen Hurts running and the ability then to be able to have those linemen down the field, you had these free options for big explosive pass plays that were like undefended. Now, anytime they try to go back to that, so the field is different. He has a different playing field to deal with, and he doesn't have that advantage. It was taken away. And now we just said the limitations that were always there for him as a quarterback. But again, they were masked by that cheat code they had in that Super Bowl season. Well, the other problem is, look, I'm not in the house. I always say this, I'm not a doctor. There's something wrong with A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown has missed a single practice in each of the last 2 weeks with knee issue. Don't know what that means. Mm-hmm. But if A.J. Brown is only going 1 for 10 and 2 for 14, A.J. Brown's not right. Because regardless of what Jalen Hurts is not some bum backup quarterback. He is good enough to get the ball. We saw it in week 15 or 16 against Pittsburgh. Smith goes over 100 and touchdown. A.J. Brown goes over 100 and touchdown. Pittsburgh might not be a great defense, but it's a good defense. So Jalen Hurts is capable of getting them the ball. And this Rams defense did not have good corners. So when we saw Brown roast them in week 11, at like 170 yards on like 5 or 6 catches, roasted them. So there's an issue with Brown. And then, of course, when Hurts, Hurts had a nasty concussion. He missed multiple games with that.
Right.
So I don't even know. Maybe he's still not even right there. But then he, of course, late in that game, he twists the knee. So I don't know what the deal with that is. But that doesn't explain the first 3 quarters. But there's some things going on here, Joe.
Yeah, the 44-yard rushing touchdown to basically kick off that game against the Rams was great. That was the explosiveness you're asking for. But yet again, Hurts fails to pass for 200 passing yards. He has only passed over 200 passing yards since week 12 once, and it was that Steelers game where he goes for 290 and 2 touchdowns. Every other game under 200. That was including the 2 games that he missed due to concussion. There's part of it with the elements thing, and I understand with the snow basically coming down the entire time, there's just naturally going to be less offense. Sometimes the sloppy conditions allow for a broken play and a long run, but we saw, I think back to that monsoon game with the Rams and Niners on Thursday Night Football back in week 15 or week 14. It's just hard to play when the elements are so constricting like that. And in reality, the way to win the football game was Saquon Barkley. That's something we discussed in the previous show last week, and Saquon Barkley was cooking. So they did kind of what you would want the team to do. What's the path of least resistance to victory? In this case, it was Saquon Barkley.
So I'm going to just go back before I get to that.
Go ahead. Yep.
Jalen Hurts' numbers are also bad because he's attempted 22 or fewer passes in 8, I believe, of his last 11 games. It's right there. But it's very few pass attempts. Who's throwing 20 passes a game, right? How much can you really do on 20 pass attempts a game? Right? It's a small number. Most quarterbacks are 33, 35. It's like half. So there's that as well. But you get back to Barkley. Look, Barkley's Thanos. He's inevitable. That's all it is. And eventually, and here's the thing. We notice a lot of Barkley's touchdown runs. Not in this game, he got one early. But he seems to always break big runs in the second half. Why? Here's the why. The Eagles' offensive line over the course of the game wears down the defensive front. That's what it is. It's not like they get better, but they are so big and powerful, and they continue just to grind on these defenders. They're worn out. And now Barkley, when the defenders are a little quarter step slow, Barkley gets that little edge and just takes it, and defense got to creep people down. When you creep people down, you think, oh, they're going to stuff the run. The problem is there's no second level help. So once Barkley makes someone miss, there's nobody back there to clean it up. So it's really a bad spot for an opposing defense.
Yeah, I'm with you. So in week 11, the first time the Eagles Commanders faced, the Eagles won 26-18. Barkley goes for, I think it was 26 for 146, 2 touchdowns. He had a couple catches in there, nearly 200 yards of total offense. Then in that week 15 or 16 game, December 22nd, I guess I got to pull that up again. You have Barkley get the 30 carries or nearly 30 carries for 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. That was A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith exclusively in the offense. Again, a game where Jalen Hurts was injured, and then Kenny Pickett comes in. I think that was the very first concussion game. That was the one where they were trailing, and the Commanders end up scoring 22 in the fourth quarter, including that touchdown to Zach Ertz with the last few seconds in there to come back. So the answer, I think, well, the question I'd ask you first is, for a third consecutive game, can Saquon Barkley be as dominant as we've seen? Again, 150 yards in the second contest, over or close to 200 total yards in that first one? Or is there a way in which the Commanders defense can almost single-handedly take that one facet from the offense?
What I'll point out is this, Joe. In that second game where Kenny Pickett came in and Barkley went 29 for $150 and 2 touchdowns, he had 108 yards in the first half, or I think maybe the first quarter. It was early. He had 108 yards quickly in that game. It was some point in the second quarter, probably. But then what happened was the Commanders made an adjustment when they realized that, I think it was at halftime, they made an adjustment. And they realized, you know what? Kenny Pickett's their quarterback. We are going to just load it up, and we're going to do what we can to stop Barkley. And for a large part of it, it kind of worked. They really did make it tough on Barkley. They just sent a lot of bodies. And then after scoring 3 touchdowns on the first 4 drives, it was only field goal attempts the rest of the way. That's all they had, 4 field goal attempts. And they did a good job slowing Barkley down. So do they go into this game saying, all right, maybe Jalen Hurts is limited, but are they going to go in saying, let's take our chances. Let's see if Hurts can beat us. Mm-hmm. At this point, why not? Because they already showed in that game, that second half, even though Barkley, again, had those huge numbers, it wasn't in the second half. And so they might just go in and sell out and say, all right, this is our fate. And I don't know if they'll do that, but it's definitely on the table, Joe.
As a 6 seed, you're sort of playing with house money anyway. Like, if they were to lose, if you even get blown out by division rival, that would stink. Obviously, it'd be awful for the fans, and Jaden Daniels and everyone else. We're all excited about the Commanders, but in reality, nobody expected the Commanders to be at this point. So you're playing with house money. I like that idea too. Watching what Jalen Hurts has done the past 2 weeks, again, the 44-yard touchdown against the Rams aside, he has not been nearly the effective weapon that he was during that Super Bowl run that they had a couple of years ago. I would make this be a Jalen Hurts game. Now, it still might end up being an easy win for the Eagles in that regard. Marshawn Lattimore is back, but that secondary still isn't very good. And frankly, the Commanders can be had on the ground. So if you have a drive or two where Jalen Hurts moves them at least into field goal range, provided Jake Elliott actually makes it, then you have to adjust your defense, and then Saquon Barkley becomes more of a factor. I do mention that for a reason. I get very nervous, and this is first-hand experience as a Packer fan. I get very nervous when your special teams are as god-awful, especially from a points perspective, field goal, extra point, a points perspective, the way the Eagles are. That's how a game that should be a 10-point favorite or something like that ends up being more like, we need the last second score to win, whether it be a field goal or otherwise. And when you shave off that 1 point, when a 7-point touchdown becomes a 6-point touchdown, fluky things from the score perspective happen. Fluky, I need to make a 2-point conversion the following drive to make up for it. Stuff happens all the time. It just gets me nervous. Not that it rears its head this week per se, but in the Super Bowl, if nothing else, that would make me very concerned too. So we've spent a lot of time on the Eagles. I want to talk about Jaden Daniels and the Commanders offense real quick as well too. I said it when I was discussing the Lions obituary of sorts. You know what the Commanders want to do, especially you think about all those 4th down opportunities that they went for in that Lions game. I kept saying to the TV, because the TV definitely was listening to me and therefore make a change. TV, they're just going to roll out Jaden Daniels. You're going to use his 4.4 speed or whatever it is on the corner. And when you have the threat of the read option, that inside zone for Brian Robinson to pound 2 yards out, you have to respect it, but maybe you don't. Maybe you just have to make sure that Jaden Daniels isn't the one that's going to beat you with his legs. There's the bubble stuff. There's the read options as well too. To me, if there is a team that's going to play this offense 3 times in a row, and think about 3 times in effectively the past 4 or 5 months, you as the Eagles know what the Commanders want to do. Is that an advantage for the Commanders that can put in a wrinkle, or is it kind of like, well, they're going to see what they've done to get him here, but there isn't much more they can do with the personnel they have?
So framing this out, the first time these teams met in week 11, Vic Fangio had a great plan for Jaden Daniels and the offense. He gave them the screens. Austin Eckler went 8 for 89. Gave him the screens, fine, whatever. It didn't hurt him. Give him the tight end, fine. Zach Ertz. He got a late garbage time touchdown. Although the game was close, so there was 6 minutes left. But he got a garbage time touchdown, a 2-point conversion, fine. McLaurin was like 1 for 10. Nobody else did anything. They threw away Daniels on the ground. 7 carries, 18 yards. They were on him. They contained him well. I don't know what happened in week 16. Daniels rushed 9 for 81. He threw for 258, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks. Look, I don't even want to say it this way, but it's the way I believe it. When Jalen Hurts got injured in that game with the concussion, I believe the whole team fell apart. Whatever happened, they stopped covering people. There were Olamide Zacchaeus running wide open. Jamison Crowder wide open for a touchdown. Terry McLaurin blown coverage wide open. This was not anything close to what we saw in that first meeting. And I don't know if they just had like the wind taken out of them when Jalen Hurts got injured, but it was not like Washington had this great play design and all these secondary receivers are just going to carve them up all day long. The Eagles didn't show up. Whatever it is, the Eagles did not show up defensively. They had no effort. They stuffed the running game in the first meeting. Second game, they gave up production on the ground. They just did not show up. I don't see what the Commanders are going to be able to do other than play their normal game and just hope Jaden Daniels can make plays. It's going to be him doing what he's been doing. He's going to have to make plays. I just think it's going to be more of the first game in terms of Fangio's defense than this week 16 abomination where the Eagles played terribly.
32-yard touchdown to Zacchaeus and a 49-yard touchdown, 49-yard touchdown to Zacchaeus, 32 to Terry McLaurin. One of my favorite bets I like to do in same-game parlays, and I'm sure we'll discuss more of this on your other programs as well, too, all the different betting and prop options for the championship games. One of my favorite ones is either longest play or longest score, and it's typically to exceed 32.5, 33.5, whatever else. And you can go for both teams. Very rarely have I seen it be higher, and even like during the peak Mahomes, Tyreek Hill days, it was longest scoring play to be 36.5 yards, something like that. There are often times where I feel like flukiness just happens. You think about the Terry McLaurin touchdown against the Lions, for example. It was one player over there that one player that wasn't over there that should have been, and one broken tackle, and that becomes a 60-yard touchdown. I do wonder if you're to take the Commander side of things specifically and say they will not have a touchdown longer than 32.5 yards. I feel very comfortable saying that's the over. I'm sorry, like I'm going under on that mark. That I believe the Eagles are effectively going to be like, hey, if you're going to score points, you are going to do it on 12-play drives where you go for 4th down twice. And we know at the end of the day, you just won't be able to execute that consistently. Like it's just going to be impossible for you to generate 4 scoring drives, whether it be 28 points or 21 points or 24 points. You can't do that over the course of the game. Is that a bet that you would take, or one that seems a little bit needless, I guess?
In the first meeting, and this is the Washington side, in the first meeting, the leading receiver had 10 yards. Eckler had more, Ertz had more yards, but the wide receivers, 10 yards as McLaurin. Somebody else might have had a 10 or an 8. That was it. They got nothing out of it. Fangio's defense did what Fangio's defense does. Put a shell over the top. They'll give you big plays. So I agree with you on that. I think the odds of them having a big play after, especially after the implosion they had against them in week 16, I think that's going to be a thing. I see on here, Michael puts up a relative question, what we're talking about. Quinyon Mitchell injured his shoulder in that last game, didn't return. And we're recording this Wednesday morning about 10:30 Eastern. And we don't know his status. They haven't started practice yet and don't know. But if he doesn't play, certainly that hurts. But they still have Darius Slay, which helps. They have Cooper DeJean, which helps. And, Isaiah Rodgers, he's not a great corner, certainly, but he's capable enough under the zone concepts to be able to do what needs to be done. Slay's playing well in the playoffs so far. So I don't know how much that really changes the outlook, because this is not a team. Look, I love Terry McLaurin, but with a lid defense over the top, I don't think you need a superstar corner to deal with him. So I think they can go next man up and be okay if Mitchell misses time. What do you think about that, Joe?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, Isaiah Rodgers is a significantly worse cornerback than Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Darius. I mean, like, Isaiah Rodgers out there, if you were doing that, I feel like it's always the offenses in the 2010s, but you would hear it on the broadcast all the time. Okay, second string corner is out or the number 2 corner is out, you know Aaron Rodgers is going to target this crappy 3rd or 4th or 5th string corner. That's Isaiah Rodgers, but I don't know if the scheme that Cliff Kingsbury and the Commanders want to run is in a position to be like, I'm going to singularly target a one position, one side. And Rodgers still has made plays even in the instances where he has been targeted. So he has experience. I don't feel like it's literally this bum practice squad corner. Like Isaiah Rodgers is at least a known name from a playing perspective, even if he's worse. So I agree with you. I'll ask this last question. Eagles -6. Where are you at with that line?
You know what? I got to take the Commanders plus the points. I think the Eagles win, but I got to take the points. The Commanders have played close games all year, and the Eagles haven't had a lot of blowouts. They blew out the Rams early in the season, 37-20. They blew out the Steelers, but they have a lot of closer games. And the Commanders have found a way to keep everything close. I mean, other than week 1 when they played Tampa Bay and they got smoked, they lost to the Ravens by 7. That was close. Pittsburgh by 1. One of the games of Philly, they lost by 8. They won the other. So I just don't think. And remember that meeting when it was the 26-18 game? The Eagles didn't have like a lead until the 4th quarter. Barkley ripped off 2 touchdowns. So I just don't think the Commanders are getting blown out by anybody right now. And like you mentioned, with Jalen Hurts and the state of the offense, I don't see how they're going to blow somebody out either.
Well, and I go back to the Jake Elliott aspect. I can't have a kicker missing extra points or field goals at this point of this season. That's the reason why I think the Commanders can cover. Again, just fluky scores can happen. Fluky decision-making would occur from that point. So I agree with you. Commanders cover by 6. Or if you wanted to say the Eagles will end up winning by 6 or more points, I would try to parlay it with Elliott making all of his kicks. I seriously think it might come down to that because the Eagles on paper are the more talented team. I think they're the better team. Papers and dollars what wins football games, though. So looking forward to that one, the early of the 2 championship contests. The other one, the crown, the jewel of it feels like the playoffs to date will be the Bills traveling once again to Arrowhead to try to stop the three-peat that this chat apparently desperately wants to see. I think the rest of the entire universe would desperately love to see Mahomes suffer some sort of consequences for his flopping, moaning, and whining on every single penalty that he seems to get. And frankly, the rest of the universe desperately wants to see the Chiefs not win the 3rd straight. That doesn't mean they will not win, though, because I think the Bills enter with some limitations too. We did an obituary for the Lions, so I guess real quick, I also want to do the same for the Ravens. The conversation after that game with the Ravens and Bills was, well, once again, Lamar Jackson, the choke job player that he is, can't win in the playoffs, can be a 3-time MVP, can't do it. I'm sick of that conversation, to be honest, Jim. There's an eye rolling that already occurs whenever I bring it up. It's the worst part of the sport when we go, well, X quarterback has more quarterback wins, therefore he's a better quarterback. It's a team sport, Jim. If Mark Andrews is even like 50% of a tight end that is capable of playing football, the Ravens probably win this game. Well, Joe, if Lamar Jackson doesn't fumble the ball away and give them 7 points, they would have won 2. Yes, Lamar didn't play perfect. He threw that dumb interception as well, too. I understand that. But literally, if Mark Andrews catches the ball before that fumble, it won't happen. If he catches the 2-point conversion, we're a different point and a different narrative for the game. If he doesn't fumble where he fumbles, we're a different conversation for this, too. Lamar Jackson played well enough to win. So did Josh Allen. It is not choke jobbed Lamar Jackson. That is my assessment. What is your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, it was the same thing, Joe. I read a reactions article after every slate of Sunday games on the RotoWire site. And when that first couple drives were over, I'm like, man, am I going to have to write about playoff Lamar again? And I watched the rest of the game. And look, Lamar Jackson made mistakes early. Quarterbacks make mistakes. It happens. But the way he played the rest of the way, I mean, an 89, I believe, yard drive at the end of the game, which, brought them all the way back. I don't know how you come out of the end of this game and say it's playoff Lamar. It's the same old Lamar. Yeah, they didn't win. They lost to a great team, but Lamar fixed the errors. If the errors compounded, if the mistakes were late in the game instead of early, it might have been a different story. But he brought them back. He gave them every chance. Joe, the thing that very few are talking about in that game, I thought that when the Ravens scored that one touchdown to close the gap a little bit earlier, I thought they should have kicked the extra point instead of going for 2. I know they were trying to tie the game, but to think through, if they kick the one and then Buffalo comes back, there was a lot of time. If Buffalo comes back down and scores another touchdown, then what would happen again if they missed? Then they would be down like 2 scores. Now it happened, but they had to prepare for that. But if they kicked that point now, that last drive, it would have been another kicked extra point, and then they would have tied the game. Who knows what would happen in the last, time that was left? Allen would have gotten the ball, but it's not like a no-brainer. He would have driven them down for a field goal.
Correct.
Maybe not. But so I don't blame Lamar Jackson. Rough start, but the way he finished, I can't say it's playoff Lamar. Not even close.
No, Zay Flowers as well in this too. When you have Rashad Bateman and whatever Mark Andrews did in that game as your 2 best options, that's difficult. Now, the one counter I would say is I have long attributed the Lamar Jackson playoff struggles to Greg Roman. I don't think it's coincidence that Greg Roman's offense completely falters in the first round of the playoffs against the Texans. Chargers were not prohibitive favorites. Vegas seemed to know something would be up, but we in the community all kind of thought that the Chargers should win that game convincingly so. They were the more talented, well-coached team, except Greg Roman does Greg Roman stuff. That is what Lamar Jackson has had to deal with throughout most of his playoff tenure. The Titans loss is really the only inexcusable one in my mind. Even 2 years ago when Zay Flowers fumbles at the 1, that's a Zay Flowers thing. That's not a Lamar Jackson thing in my mind. So I get really annoyed with the playoff choking Lamar Jackson. If the fumble thing happened, like I understand the fumble happened directly results in a touchdown effectively. To say Lamar Jackson should fall on it or just go for another play or whatever else is to uniquely take away the one thing that makes Lamar Jackson be a 3-time MVP favorite and capable of doing what he did at the end, that 89-yard drive where he was running for first downs and everything else. I'm not going to take the ball out of my player's hands that can do that. I would rather see him make a play even if it comes to the expense of a fumble. That could happen in week 4. That could happen in week 12. That could happen in the Super Bowl. It doesn't matter. Lamar Jackson gets you there because he does that stuff more often than not.
You talked about the former coach, Greg Roman, who's now with the Chargers. Well, Todd Monken made a tactical error in this game. Early in the game, Buffalo said, we want to stop Derrick Henry. It was a different way than the Pittsburgh Steelers tried, which is just sending people, and Lamar just pulled the ball and went. They put extra bodies up front, which is very unlike the Bills. But all Todd Monken had to do was bring in his jumbo package. And then the Bills have light, small defenders. And if they would have matched that extra body with extra beef themselves, they would have steamrolled them. Derrick Henry would have been hot from the beginning. It was just a very poor reaction to what the defense did, because Buffalo was basically giving you the opportunity to steamroll them on the ground because, like I said, their big package defense is not big. The Ravens would be able to smash that. So tactical error. Lamar didn't even have to be in that spot. It was very poorly done.
Yeah, and I felt like you could just say, hey, well, use Derrick Henry more. Like I get it. That first half was kind of bleak. There wasn't many opportunities for Derrick Henry to really get going, but there are ways to change that outcome the way the offense is going to get. So, all right, let's talk about this playoff matchup, which will be the 3rd time, I believe, I have it pulled up right now, 4th time since 2020 that the Bills' playoff ride could end at the expense of the Chiefs. Now, not all of them were in Arrowhead. This one will be. We know the raucous crowd environment. We understand what the Chiefs are capable of doing. I don't think there's going to be nearly as much weather. In fact, the cold spell, which here in Madison, Wisconsin, I imagine you for Jim as well too, are currently dealing with, that will have passed at least at this point for the Midwest. So instead of minus 13, minus 10, it'll be more like 30, 20 degrees weather, which you'd normally expect. So here we go. I mean, the Bills side of things, Josh Allen is playing his best football. That does include making the refs be concerned that Josh Allen might have broke his fingernail. We're going to have 2 of the biggest floppers, whiner quarterbacks that we could possibly have right now. But at the same time, it's the value of the offense is that it could be Amari Cooper. It could be Keon Coleman. You could have James Cook do some things out of the backfield to run for it. It could be Curtis Samuel getting a 25-yard catch. It could be a Keon Coleman. It could be the tight ends. There are a variety of different ways that the Bills offense can beat you. But what we kind of, and this is more of like the dumb lizard brain in me, I want to know one consistent way, one reliable way. I want my star receiver I know capable of doing it. The Bills don't have that, but the system has worked effectively through the first 2 weeks of the playoffs. Can it work a 3rd time, though, against this battle-tested Chiefs team?
It's a great question. So James Cook, and I pointed this out going into last week's game, He's been a great running back this year. But the games he's had his big 100-yard performances were either against very bad run defense or very small defensive fronts. Like when they played their first playoff game against the Denver Broncos, I said they're going to steamroll them on the ground because the Broncos are small. They're a pass rushing line. They could be bullied, and they were bullied. You saw the Bills bring in 6 offensive linemen and road grade them. Well, go back to last year's playoff game when the Chiefs played the Bills. And in the first half, James Cook was throttling them. Well, what happened after that? The Chiefs made an adjustment. And all of a sudden, James Cook couldn't get any yardage. They just stuffed them, stopped them. And then this year, it was like 9 carries for 28 or 30 yards, I think it was. He didn't do much in that game. Now, it wasn't many carries. But again, the Chiefs knew to look for him. And the Chiefs defended him well. So there's no reason to think they're not going to defend him well again. And if James Cook is not going, I don't trust those wide receivers to win against the secondary. Like I said, last week, we had Jalen Watson back. Trent McDuffie's a stud. Trent McDuffie could play outside or in the slot. Really, the one receiver who could probably hurt you is Khalil Shakir. Well, I'm going to move McDuffie in the slot to guard him and take him out because McDuffie's that level of corner, and he can play either. And last time in that game when they played in the regular season, Najee Johnson was subbing in for Watson, and Amari Cooper had 2 catches for 55 yards. One of them put him in the red zone, 2 deep passes. Najee Johnson, can't cover a legitimate NFL receiver, but they don't have to deal with that now. Now they've got their guys, Jamari Connors, and they got 3 corners that can play. And so the fact is this, those receivers don't scare anybody. Dalton Kincaid catches about 53% of his passes, so that hasn't been a big problem. So what does that allow Spagnuolo to do? You don't have to double any receiver on that team, which means you got extra bodies to send pressure, which we know Spags loves sending his pressure. So honestly, Spagnuolo's in a great spot here defensively to take advantage of what the Bills want to do. Now, the question is, can Josh Allen play Superman? Can he run for 120 yards on his own? Maybe he could. If he puts the cape on, he has a chance of, dragging that offense with him. But I don't like the matchup for the Bills.
Interesting. So, my whole run up to that was the Bills can do a variety of different things. There isn't one thing that they're reliant on or one player on to win a certain matchup or outcome. Or think about series of drives throughout the game. There are a number of different players, but you're more countering and saying, well, any sort of scenario in which the Bills might try to do or beat it, there is kind of a check or counter that the Chiefs are going to be able to employ.
Right, because they could, and to your point in the beginning was, they could do that against lesser defenses. Not that the Chiefs are a great defense, but with Jalen Watson back, it changes the whole secondary. They're no longer a weak secondary. They can do enough, and they play a very solid zone scheme that helps each other, and they're very good at passing players off. And so what your point was, the Bills could take advantage of limited defenses and do that. But look, once the Ravens got going in the second half of that game, they were barely converting first downs. They were like 3 and outs. They couldn't even move the ball once the Ravens got serious on defense. And, the Ravens, again, they were a good defense. They weren't like a Super Bowl caliber defense. They were good. But once the Bills, that game got going, they weren't moving the ball. So, I don't know. This Buffalo offense, in my mind, it's not the juggernaut offense we saw that put up 36 in the AFC Championship a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think any analysis trying to say the Bills are going to win this game is effectively wish casting. And to be fair, we aren't in the locker rooms. We're not part of the game plan. We're not in the coaching staff. Fluky things can and will happen. It is an oblong shaped ball that we are talking about when it comes to the outcome of contests. All that stuff is there, but I don't know necessarily how the Chiefs lose other than the Bills are a good team, and sometimes you're just due to win one of these. Again, I was incorrectly stating it. This is the 4th time that the Bills could have their playoff stretch end since 2020 to the Chiefs. It's not already than the 4th time that's going to occur. And these teams face each other in the regular season often. There's a lot of heartbreak that would be involved in this. There's extra motivation that you can attribute to the Bills. I think that's certainly clear. And resting on your laurels a little bit that the Chiefs are going to be doing. There's a lot of that stuff. But this isn't Madden. You're not adding +5 overall to players just because they lost a bunch of times before. This is on the football field. Who is the better team that's capable of executing their will more than the other team? And I tend to agree. And I think Arrowhead really does add an element to this. In my mind, is for the Super Bowl. Whether it be the Eagles beating the Commanders or somehow the Commanders upsetting the Eagles, I don't think it matters. Whoever wins this game is going to win the Super Bowl and win it convincingly, provided no injuries occur. So with the Chiefs side of things, Other than Mahomes getting his 2 free first downs from the refs because they're colluding together,
Yeah.
I think there's the Xavier Worthy factor. I was surprised Marquise
yeah.
Brown wasn't used enough against the Texans. There's DeAndre Hopkins as well too. It's the rushing attack that I almost think is, again, it feels like for the third or fourth playoff in a row, non-existent or a problem, and that the Chiefs are going to have to pass the ball to win this football game.
So I like how you set that up. I can't prove this. This is a theory. People are going to think I'm nuts, and I probably am nuts. Andy Reid seems to be the king of when he doesn't have to show you something, he doesn't show you something.
I'm with you on this.
I have to think in that Texans game, Andy Reid, without telling his team, had to know they were going to beat the Texans. Had to know they were going to beat them. Who do they have? They had Nico, they had Mixon, and they had Stroud. They have a bad offensive line. They had secondary receivers, not so good. Yeah, they had a nice pass rush, but you were going to always score points on them. Maybe they didn't need Hollywood Brown in that game. Maybe they didn't need him because Hollywood Brown is still a newer component of the offense. And Andy Reid's eye was on the Super Bowl the whole time. Why do you want to tip off good plays with Hollywood Brown in a game you know you're going to win at home? I know no game is guaranteed, but
you can't do that. But you could do that, right? Like, I understand where you're going with this. Keep going.
Yeah, he may have had tricks in the bag. If they got down, they could have used Hollywood Brown. They maybe could have used DeAndre Hopkins. They didn't have to do it. So Mahomes throws 14 of his 25 passes to Worthy and Kelsey. Worthy's already been a part of it. Worthy already did this stuff against the Bills. Yes. So using him, it was no real story because Buffalo's seen it and they couldn't stop him. And Xavier Worthy in that game would have had his first 100-yard game of the season, his only one. I don't know what he did. It was like a 40-yard pass right in his hands, and he didn't look at the line. He stepped out of bounds. It was like a total brain freeze. But there was nobody near him. But that would have put him over 100. But he got to the Bills on every type of play. They can't deal with the speed. But now in this game, they're going to have to worry about that. Now, in this game, if you layer in Marquise Brown, because the Bills played that great zone. They're built to beat the Chiefs. This is Andy Reid's trump card. This is like one of the reasons he brought him in, to beat the teams that might have an answer for what they want to do. I think Hollywood Brown's a big part of this game plan. And I think that getting him over the middle and into space quickly, that's going to be very heavily weaponized.
Yeah, to go back to the Ben Johnson Lions conversation, calling as many trick plays as the Lions did might have actually been a detriment at some point because the defense might be able to prepare. If you're able to hold back a punch, not that teams do this per se, and it would be very cocky to be like Andy Reid deliberately didn't use Marquise Brown because they knew they were going to beat the Texans despite trailing at halftime or close to it. Like, I know you and I both understand. I know the listeners understand that. We're not necessarily saying that, but if you can hold back a punch, or better yet, use it when it's going to be most effective. That's the key for this. And that's where I go back to Hollywood Brown being a factor on top of Xavier Worthy, on top of Travis Kelce, on top of DeAndre Hopkins. And I almost wonder if that's where you as a defense have to be committed to stopping all those passes. And then this is the first game where the rushing attack does get going, where it is Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco averaging over 4 yards per carry, ripping off longer runs. It's sort of like what the Packers did with Josh Jacobs this year. Jacobs wasn't breaking many 60-yard Saquon Barkley touchdowns, but oftentimes he's getting 4, 5, 6 yards per carry, and that's exacting your will on the defense. Maybe that's a scenario in which we see Pacheco and Kareem Hunt finally do that this week.
Now, Joe, I'm glad you brought this up. Isaiah Pacheco is not right. He has not recovered from that leg injury. It was a grisly broken leg. The poor man. I feel terrible for him. But to think you just say, okay, it'll physically heal over. The bone will, heal over in that 8 or 10 weeks or whatever it was. Yes, the bone will heal over. But we've heard it before. Players have gotten injured. Well, yeah, often it took them till the next year till they were themselves. I think we're seeing that right now. Now, look, Pacheco had a couple nice runs in that game against Houston, but overall, he has not been a strong runner in the last 4 or 5 games. It's like 3.5 yards per carry. He is just not giving the explosion. Right now, the old Kareem Hunt is actually a better player right now.
I agree.
Today. Mm-hmm. And it's sad to say because I want to see Pacheco healthy and just rolling it out. So I don't know how much they're going to get from the rushing attack here. And it also hurts that Joe Thuney is kicked out to tackle because, and I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of the reserve guard that's taking over, which I'll look up as we're talking.
I'll pull it up. You keep talking about it now because I know who you're referring to.
Yeah, Mike Caliendo. Mike Caliendo. And so now what happened was we had an interior line that was elite at run blocking for the Chiefs. Well, now 1/3 of that is Mike Caliendo, and that does hurt them. So that's not helping that push, which the Chiefs would get the defense to that second level. And now with Caliendo, that really hurts that. So I don't know how much the rushing attack is going to get going here. Mahomes certainly will run for a little more on broken plays.
Yeah.
But the good news here is Travis Kelce, because the whole point of bringing in Marquise Brown and Hollywood Brown in my mind was not just to open up the downfield passing for Mahomes, which hadn't been there the last couple years, but then their speed forces defenses to react, which means what opens up? The middle of the field. You can't gang up on Kelce when you've got two burners that could get the ball and shred your defense. Because remember, the whole point of today's zone defenses is to limit explosive plays. That's not Travis Kelce. That's Xavier Worthy. That's Hollywood Brown. So the field should be open for Kelce. It's a quagmire for the defense because the best player is the one you can't afford to dedicate resources to.
Right. And again, they have so many different options that can beat you. We just talked about Marquise Brown, Travis Kelce, Xavier Worthy, nearly at 100-yard receiving yard day. I get concerned that there's just too much ammo. There's too many, much on the way I was saying that the Bills can beat you in a variety of different ways. It's like that, but times two with what the Chiefs can do. And maybe it's just name and star power, right? Because it's not Marquise Brown, first-round pick by the Ravens. It's a guy that has had a major knee and leg issue over really the past 2 or 3 years of his career. It's not DeAndre Hopkins of Texans lore. We're talking about like fourth version, recycled version of that of DeAndre Hopkins. And Travis Kelce might as well be out on the next Era tour with Taylor Swift. Like we're at that point of Travis Kelce's career. This isn't the same like peak version of all these guys. But when it's Andy Reid, when it's Mahomes, and it's this quadrant of guys that's available, I desperately want to see somebody else in the Super Bowl. The last thing that I want is a repeat of Chiefs-Eagles again. But I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And in that case, I think the Chiefs curb stomp the Eagles in this version of what we're seeing from Philadelphia. One last thing before we head out. I like the prop here at 25.5 over on the rushing yards for Patrick Mahomes. You could probably do a same game parlay on the over on Josh Allen's rushing yards too, but over 20.5 rushing yards, -15, -110, depending on which book you're looking at, and taking the Chiefs to win. There is also a prop bet. Will the Chiefs get 3 first downs given by the refs? I'm taking the over on that. That's not actually there. Sorry. But I guarantee that will happen as well too. But I do think even if the refs stay out of their business in this one, which they won't, they are incapable of doing so, the Chiefs are going to beat the Bills this week.
Now, you and I both talk about Mahomes running in the 3 playoff games that Mahomes played against Josh Allen and the Bills. 6 for 19 last year, 7 for 69 in 2021, 5 carries for 5 yards back in 2020. It was forever ago. So just remember that the playoff history, 2 of 3 games has been less than 20 yards, but I'm kind of with you, Joe. I do think that, more likely than not, he will run the ball. Other things to consider when you're looking at these props, Josh Allen in the 3 playoff games, again, against these Kansas City Chiefs, here are his rushing totals: 72, 68, and 88. That's, again, between 72 and 88 yards. Just moving it up to 50-plus yards, Allen's, and we know Allen always going to run in the postseason anyway. Yeah. So I think that's a real solid bet. Travis Kelce for a touchdown. He has scored in the 3 playoff games against the Bills. He scored 2 touchdowns last year, 1 in 2021 and 2 in 2020. He has 5 touchdowns in 3 playoff games against them. We know in the big moments, Kelce's the guy, and Mahomes has thrown at least 2 touchdown passes in every one of these games against the Bills in the postseason. So I think Kelce for a touchdown goes along with that as well.
What were the odds on that? Like, do you have that somewhere? Because I think that's actually really interesting. That I would just assume would be even like minus territory at this point, but probably not.
For which one, Joe?
Sorry, thank you. For Kelce scoring a touchdown against the Bills.
Well, it was like plus 115. I think it wasn't bad.
Okay,
I'll look it up as you're talking. But
so last year, 2023, 3 touchdowns in the postseason. I'm looking at it right now. In the 2022 season, 4 touchdowns in the postseason, divisional, 2 against the Jaguars, then 1 against the Bengals, 1 against the Eagles as well too. And then going back to 2021, Kelce, I believe, also has. I mean, that was the first year that he didn't score a touchdown during the postseason. So something like 7, including this year, touchdowns over the past 3 postseasons. Postseason, Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce is a thing. Sorry, Taylor Swift. Travis Kelce is actually a real thing. And I would not be surprised if once again, Travis Kelce plus Taylor Swift is a combo that is unbreakable for this. Yeah, plus 125. Thank you, Jim, for being able to find that on DraftKings. I love that one. That'll be one I'll be tossing the same game parlay as well, too. So any final words before we head out on the playoffs?
We got to make a prediction. We kind of did, but we kind of didn't. Look, it's impossible for me to bet against Patrick Mahomes on this stage. But I think this is the most defensible one from the X's and O's standpoint, because there have been past times where the Bills were probably a better team, but the Chiefs won anyway. So this time, I think, again, not having Stephon Diggs. Now, I know he wasn't the same version last year, but not having an elite receiver, I think that hurts Buffalo. I think defensively, having now to deal with, I believe, in a better integrated Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy. I think that even though this defense was built to stop the Chiefs, I think the Chiefs have some counterpoints they haven't really shown against this team. So I do think the Mahomes narrative is the one to ride. They're only 1.5 point favorites. So I'm on that for sure, because I think that right now that rest comes out. This is where the rest comes out now. Last week, I think they shook off some rust too. Well, now that rust is shaken off, and now those 23 days of rest really come into play, because this is a really, really healthy team. So I do think it's not going to be a blowout, but the 1.5 line is beautiful. It's probably going to be a field goal 4-point game, because I don't think either of these teams would blow out the other.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think the Chiefs win again. I think this is going to be Chiefs Eagles. There's part of me that wants to be, not contrarian is the wrong word, but I want to be even more aggressive on saying the Chiefs are going to win. So the look ahead line, I believe, in Chiefs Eagles is -2. I would almost go up to like -3.5 if I could.
Oh, yeah.
And that I think will probably put you close to plus money. But in reality, if you just right now take the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl, that's +220 on DraftKings. That is the best odds you're going to find if you believe they're going to beat the Bills and believe they're going to beat the Eagles. So whether teasing the spreads or otherwise, I think just saying Chiefs to win the Super Bowl right now at +220, that's the second best odds. Eagles actually are the favorites in that regard. And I think that's only because they should have an easier path to the Super Bowl. But we believe, unfortunately, because the world hates us. Sorry, Chiefs fans that seem abundant in the chat right now. The world hates us. This is the easy path for the Chiefs. They got the matchup they want in the Bills, and their offense is going to be in a good spot. Again, reminder to folks, we're not here on this channel next week. We'll be back again for the Super Bowl, flush with prop bets at that point. We're going to probably have 50 plus. I've had a really good record in Super Bowl prop bets. I've done the article now 3 years in a row, and I think we're talking about like 10-3 or 10-5 in each one of those. And I go deep. We're talking about like, what's the anthem, over under longest, that kind of stuff. That is my bread and butter, Jim. So you're going to be able to provide all the football knowledge. I'm going to be able to provide all the Taylor Swift nonsense that will be applied coming for that prop bet stuff too for the Super Bowl.
And one more thing, Joe, I always, every week, I do heavy notes on these playoff games. Or on my X, to pin to the profile at Jim Coventry NFL. As it stands right now, I got 20 pages of notes on these two games. I have I have all the historical data between the Bills Chiefs separated postseason, regular season, player matchups, offensive line, defensive line, all that stuff is in there. So you can break it down any way you like. But again, it's on the X at Jim Coventry NFL, free. Just click it on. It's a Google Doc, view only. You're all set.
This is my favorite betting time of the year. I think there's so much juice that there are on certain things, the obvious things, but the ones that not enough people know about, it's a layup just about every time. So I'm very excited. We'll have basically a whole show 2 weeks from now discussing it. Reminder again, if you liked what we did here today, or if you've liked any of the content that Jim's been able to provide, it feels like every single day now for the past 6 months, please subscribe to the RotoWire Fantasy Football channel. It'd be great. We're trying to hit our numbers at the start of the season. If you liked this video, if you could like it on YouTube, that'd be great too, or any of the platforms you're watching now. Follow Jim Coventry at Jim Coventry NFL as well too. He's been getting you set with now. You could say 20 pages. Let's double it, because that's the work you're putting in. 40 pages of content up on Jim's Twitter right now.
It's single space, so it really is 40. College rule.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll be back in 2 weeks discussing the Super Bowl and all the prop bets that you could have for it. Thank you, everyone, for listening.